The biological hierarchy system was, without question, one of the galaxy's most elegantly flawed inventions. Like most bureaucratic masterpieces, it appeared logical on the surface, while being fundamentally divorced from reality. The system ranked every known species based on their homeworld's hostility rating, creating a neat pyramid where Class A worlds produced advanced beings of refined sensibilities, while Class Z planets supposedly churned out primitive brutes too busy surviving to evolve proper civilization. It was a beautiful theory that had the minor drawback of being completely wrong about everything important. Meridian Station exemplified this cosmic comedy of errors. The massive orbital platform drifted through the Centauri drift like a jeweled monument to interspecies cooperation, hosting beings from across the galaxy in gleaming chambers specifically designed for their environmental needs. The station's architects had anticipated every possible requirement: methane breathers, silicon-based entities, creatures that existed as pure energy, and beings so delicate they required force fields to prevent their dissolution in normal gravity. What they hadn't anticipated was how entertaining it would be to watch these diverse species consistently misunderstand each other in spectacular fashion. The fusion engineering sector was a perfect example of this ongoing misunderstanding. The massive chamber housed the station's primary power systems, including fusion conduits that carried enough energy to vaporize small moons. Most species required full environmental suits, electromagnetic shielding, and robotic assistance to work anywhere near the equipment. The radiation alone was sufficient to scramble most beings' neural patterns, and the gravitational fluctuations could liquefy organic matter if handled incorrectly. Lyra Chen worked in the sector, wearing a standard jumpsuit and what appeared to be mild boredom. The human engineer stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with black hair pulled into a functional ponytail and hands that looked too small for the massive fusion couplers she was currently realigning. To the casual observer, she appeared supremely unsuited for her environment. The casual observer would be making the same mistake that most of the galaxy had been making about humans for the past 50 years. "Fascinating," came a melodious voice that seemed to emanate from the air itself. "I wasn't aware the station had begun employing primitive organics for technical work." Lyra didn't immediately respond. She was focused on a particularly stubborn fusion coupling that had been misbehaving for weeks, sending micro-fluctuations through the station's power grid. Other engineers had declared it irreparable without a full shutdown, which would have cost the station millions of credits. Lyra had volunteered to fix it during active operation, a suggestion that had caused 3 different species to file formal safety complaints. "Must be having difficulty with the neural interface," the voice continued with what might have been amusement. "Perhaps you need assistance from someone with actual cognitive capabilities." Lyra finished her adjustment, wiped her hands on her jumpsuit and turned to face her visitor. What she saw was both beautiful and deeply unsettling in the way that only advanced evolution could achieve. Vex'thara Zilmuth stood nearly 7 feet tall, his body an intricate network of bioelectric conduits that pulsed with soft blue light. His species, the Synaptrix, had evolved on Vex'thara, a Class A world so perfectly balanced that the most dangerous thing on the planet was seasonal pollen. Over millions of years they had developed beyond the need for crude physical interaction, becoming beings of pure neural elegance who could interface directly with technology and manipulate the thoughts of lesser species. "Can I help you?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying the particular tone humans reserved for interruptions they hadn't requested. "Help me?" Vex'thara's laughter sounded like wind chimes in a data stream. "My dear primitive, I'm here to satisfy my curiosity about your species' alleged competence. The reports are quite amusing, really. Apparently, some beings actually believe that creatures from Deathworlds possess meaningful intelligence." The engineering bay had gone quiet, other workers had stopped their tasks to observe the interaction, and several were already accessing their personal communicators. Word traveled fast on Meridian Station, especially when it involved potential entertainment. "Meaningful intelligence," Lyra repeated thoughtfully, "and what would you consider meaningful?" Vex'thara's bioelectric patterns brightened, and suddenly every electronic device in the bay began responding to his presence. Diagnostic screens flickered with data he was accessing directly, maintenance drones rose into the air under his neural control, and the very fusion conduits seemed to hum in harmony with his thoughts. This is meaningful intelligence, little Deathworlder, the ability to interface directly with technology, to process information at the speed of thought, to influence the neural patterns of other beings through will alone. My species abandoned crude physical manipulation eons ago. Impressive, Lyra admitted, watching a maintenance drone perform an elaborate aerial ballet under his control. Very pretty. Pretty. The word emerged as a discordant harmonic. Like a light show. Very theatrical. Lyra's smile was polite and completely empty of warmth. Though I have to ask, what happens when the power goes out? Before Vex'thara could formulate a response, the bay's communication system activated with its characteristic chime. Attention all station personnel. The quarterly dominance trials will commence in 4 standard hours. Registration is now open for qualified participants. The dominance trials were Meridian Station's answer to the galaxy's obsession with hierarchical positioning. Unlike crude physical competitions, these trials tested mental fortitude, technological integration, and strategic thinking. They were typically dominated by the more advanced species, with energy manipulators like Vex'thara's kind regularly demonstrating their superiority over mere physical beings. How wonderfully convenient, Vex'thara said, his bioelectric patterns shifting into what might have been anticipation. Perhaps our little Deathworlder would care to participate? I'm certain the audience would find it educational. Are you challenging me? Lyra asked. I'm offering you an opportunity to demonstrate your species' supposed capabilities before a civilized audience, Vex'thara replied, though I certainly understand if you prefer to decline. Not everyone possesses the neural capacity for public competition. The other engineers exchanged glances. This was either going to be hilarious or tragic, and they weren't entirely sure which outcome they preferred. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, studying Vex'thara's pulsing bioelectric form. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an undertone that made several nearby beings suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. I accept. 4 hours later, the Supremacy Arena was packed beyond capacity. The dominance trials always attracted crowds, but word had spread about the unusual matchup between the elegant synaptic neural manipulator and the tiny human engineer. Betting pools had formed throughout the station, with odds heavily favoring Vex'thara. After all, he stood 7 feet tall, could interface directly with any technology, and had never lost a mental competition. Lyra, meanwhile, sat in the preparation chamber still wearing her engineering jumpsuit, apparently reading a technical manual about fusion reactor maintenance. She looked like someone waiting for a particularly boring lecture to begin. Admiral Korthik Vane, the station's reptilian commander, activated the arena's communication systems with a low growl of satisfaction. The Admiral enjoyed the trials, particularly when they reminded the various species about their proper places in the galactic hierarchy. Today's dominance trials will test 3 critical aspects of advanced intelligence: neural fortitude, environmental adaptation, and strategic supremacy. Our contestants are Vex'thara Zilmoth of Vex'thara and Lyra Chen of Earth. The pause before Earth was significant. Most of the audience had never heard of the planet, and those who had knew it only as a Class Z statistical anomaly. The first trial will test resistance to neural intrusion using progressive psychic assault systems. Contestants will maintain mental coherence while subjected to increasingly sophisticated mental attacks. Vex'thara approached the testing chamber with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his intellectual superiority. His bioelectric patterns were already adapting, creating neural firewalls and synaptic barriers that glowed with sophisticated elegance. The psychic assault systems were designed to probe, attack, and ultimately overwhelm the mental defenses of any known species. The first wave of attacks struck him like gentle rain. His neural patterns absorbed and redirected the assault with graceful efficiency, his bioelectric form brightening as he demonstrated the superiority of synaptic mental architecture. The crowd murmured appreciatively as complex geometric patterns of thought defense bloomed around him. Lyra entered her testing chamber, sat down in the center, and began humming what sounded like an ancient Earth song. The psychic assault systems struck her with the same graduated intensity they had used against Vex'thara. The sophisticated mental attacks, designed to overwhelm neural pathways and shatter cognitive coherence, encountered something they had never experienced before. They encountered a human mind. The attacks didn't bounce off Lyra's thoughts. They simply disappeared. Not blocked, not directed, but absorbed into a mental landscape so chaotic and adaptive that the assault systems couldn't maintain coherence. Her mind was like trying to attack a storm with logic, or threatening an earthquake with mathematics. She continued humming, occasionally pausing to adjust her position in the chair. "Remarkable," whispered physician Lyra, the station's multi-tentacle chief medical officer. "Her neural patterns are completely stable." "That's not stability," replied broadcaster Zentish, the gaseous entity responsible for recording the trials. "That's something else entirely." The psychic assault systems escalated through their full range of attacks, techniques that had broken the minds of conquered species, weapons that had ended wars, mental viruses that could shatter the consciousness of energy beings themselves. All of it vanished into the swirling chaos of human thought, without leaving so much as a ripple. By the time the first trial concluded, Vex'thara had demonstrated incredible mental architecture and sophisticated defensive strategies. Lyra had demonstrated that human minds existed in a state of controlled chaos that made conventional attacks completely irrelevant. The second trial moved to environmental adaptation. Contestants would face progressively hostile conditions, designed to test their ability to maintain function under extreme stress. Vex'thara entered the environmental chamber with elegant preparation, his bioelectric systems already adapting to anticipated challenges. When the temperature spiked, he rerouted his electrical patterns to compensate. When toxic gases flooded the chamber, he created electromagnetic barriers. When radiation levels increased, he modified his neural frequency to maintain coherence. It was a beautiful display of technological integration and adaptive intelligence. Vex'thara lasted 47 minutes before the accumulated stresses overwhelmed his bioelectric matrix. Lyra entered the chamber and immediately started sweating. The hostile environment made her cough. The temperature variations caused her to shiver and pant. The radiation exposure made her skin flush red. She looked absolutely miserable. He also didn't stop functioning. An hour passed. Then 2. The environmental chamber cycled through conditions that should have killed any organic being in minutes. Acid rain that could dissolve metal. Atmospheric pressure that should have crushed her organs. Gravity fields that fluctuated between 0 and crushing intensity. Electromagnetic storms that fried electronic equipment. Lyra endured all of it while maintaining her assigned tasks with steady, methodical efficiency. "How is this possible?" Vex'thara asked, his bioelectric patterns flickering with confusion. "Tuesday," Lyra replied, toweling sweat from her face as she exited the chamber. "This is what Tuesday feels like where I'm from." The final trial was strategic supremacy. Contestants would face adaptive combat AI, designed to test not just mental acuity, but tactical thinking, pattern recognition, and strategic adaptation under pressure. Vex'thara entered the simulation with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a battle of wits. The combat AI began with simple scenarios, which he solved with elegant efficiency. His bioelectric form interfaced directly with the simulation systems, allowing him to process information at superhuman speeds and coordinate responses with technological precision. As the scenarios increased in complexity, Vex'thara's performance became genuinely impressive. He orchestrated multi-dimensional strategies, predicted enemy movements through pure logical analysis, and demonstrated the kind of mental flexibility that had made his species the galaxy's premier strategic advisors. He fought like someone who had mastered combat as an intellectual exercise. Lyra entered the simulation, took one look at the initial scenario, and did something that caused the combat AI to pause in what might have been confusion. She ignored the rules entirely. The simulation had presented a classic tactical scenario: limited resources, enemy positions, terrain advantages to consider. Standard procedure involved careful analysis, resource allocation, and strategic planning. Lyra bypassed all of that by doing something the AI hadn't anticipated. She convinced the simulated enemy forces to switch sides. Not through technological manipulation or mental domination, but through the kind of chaotic psychological warfare that only a species raised on a Deathworld could conceive. She exploited logical inconsistencies in the AI's programming, created paradoxes that made continued opposition seem irrational, and generally approached the problem from angles that the simulation's designers had never considered. "She's not fighting the AI," observed physician Yildara, her tentacles writhing with what might have been professional fascination. She's confusing it. That's not confusion, broadcaster Zentish replied, his gaseous form swirling nervously. That's something much worse. The combat simulation escalated. More complex scenarios, better AI, multiple layers of strategic challenge. Lyra's response was to become increasingly creative in her complete disregard for conventional tactics. She turned defense systems against their own networks. She convinced AI commanders that their objectives were fundamentally illogical. She created such tangled webs of strategic chaos that the simulation's own intelligence began to question its basic programming. By the time the trial reached its highest levels, Lyra wasn't solving the combat scenarios, she was breaking them. The sophisticated AI systems designed to test the strategic capabilities of advanced species found themselves facing something they had never encountered, a mind that had evolved to survive in a reality so hostile that conventional logic was a luxury rather than a necessity. Vex'thara, watching from the sidelines, experienced something his species hadn't felt in millennia: genuine terror. The final simulation was designed to be impossible, a scenario with no correct solution, built to test how contestants handled inevitable failure. The AI itself was a masterwork of programming, incorporating strategic algorithms from across the galaxy. Lyra looked at the scenario for approximately 30 seconds, then did something that shouldn't have been possible. She made the AI laugh. Not intentionally, and certainly not through any technological interface. She simply approached the problem with such chaotic creativity that the AI's logical systems experienced what could only be described as existential amusement. The machine intelligence, faced with a mind that treated impossible problems as minor inconveniences, developed something resembling a sense of humor. The simulation ended when the AI declared the scenario sufficiently absurd and requested permission to study human psychology for research purposes. Contestant Lyra Chen has completed the strategic trial, Admiral Korthek announced, his reptilian voice carrying a note of disbelief. All 3 trials are now concluded. The winner of this cycle's dominance trials is Lyra Chen of Earth. The crowd's response was a mixture of confused applause and nervous silence. They had witnessed something unprecedented, though most weren't entirely sure what. Vex'thara, meanwhile, was experiencing something approaching a complete existential breakdown. His carefully constructed worldview, built on millions of years of assumed synaptic superiority, was crumbling faster than his bioelectric patterns could process. "This is impossible," he said, approaching Lyra as she left the arena. "Your species is classified as primitive. You have no advanced neural architecture, no bioelectric capabilities, no anything that should matter." "That's true," Lyra agreed pleasantly. "We're very primitive." "Then, how?" Lyra considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Do you know what the most dangerous thing about evolution is, Vex'thara?" What?" "It doesn't care about your theories. Evolution only cares about what works. And sometimes, what works is completely insane by any logical standard." Vex'thara's bioelectric patterns were beginning to flicker erratically as he processed the implications. "My species didn't evolve on a Deathworld," Lyra continued. "We evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us every single day for millions of years. We didn't develop resistance to mental attacks. We developed minds so chaotic that mental attacks can't find anything stable to target." "But your neural patterns are so disorganized," Vex'thara protested. "Exactly. Your species developed beautiful, elegant mental architecture because you could afford to. We developed whatever worked, regardless of how it looked. Beauty is a luxury, survival is a necessity." "But surely advanced civilization requires moving beyond such primitive adaptation?" "Does it?" Lyra asked. "Or does it require learning to be civilized without forgetting how to be dangerous?" The challenge came without warning. Whether it was wounded pride, species programming, or simple desperation, Vex'thara suddenly attempted something that his kind hadn't done in centuries: direct neural domination. Bioelectric energy surged from his form in a focused beam designed to overwhelm and control human consciousness. It was a technique that had conquered entire species, an expression of pure mental force that should have been utterly irresistible. It struck Lyra's mind and immediately encountered a problem that Vex'thara's species had never anticipated. Human consciousness wasn't organized like other species. It wasn't a neat hierarchy of thoughts and responses that could be controlled through logical interface. It was a swirling storm of chaos, creativity, contradiction, and pure stubborn irrationality that had been forged in the fires of a world that wanted everything dead. Vex'thara's attempt at mental domination was like trying to control a hurricane with a spreadsheet. The feedback was immediate and catastrophic. Vex'thara's elegant bioelectric patterns, suddenly forced to process the sheer chaotic complexity of human thought, began to overload. His neural pathways, evolved for efficiency and elegance, couldn't handle the beautiful insanity of a mind that had learned to survive by embracing contradiction. Sparks began to emerge from his bioelectric matrix, then smoke, then small explosions as his sophisticated neural architecture tried and failed to process thoughts that followed no logical pattern. "How?" Lyra said, watching with professional interest as Vex'thara's spine began to malfunction. "You probably shouldn't have done that." Vex'thara collapsed to the deck, his bioelectric systems flickering like a dying star. His elegant neural matrix, overwhelmed by its brief contact with human consciousness, had essentially experienced the equivalent of a complete system crash. "Medical team to the arena," Lyra called calmly. "Non-urgent, but he's going to need some serious rewiring." Physician Yildara arrived with her medical team, her tentacles writhing with a mixture of professional concern and scientific curiosity. "What happened to him?" "It tried to interface directly with my thoughts," Lyra explained. "His neural architecture wasn't designed to handle that kind of input." "You mean human consciousness actually damaged his bioelectric matrix?" Physician Yildara incredulously. "Think of it this way," Lyra said thoughtfully. "His mind is like a beautiful, efficient computer designed to process elegant, logical inputs. My mind is like a storm system that's been struck by lightning while fighting a tornado. When he tried to interface with that, his systems overloaded," the physician finished. "Pretty much." The medical team carefully loaded Vex'thara onto a neural stabilization platform. As they prepared to transport him to the reconstruction bay, his flickering consciousness managed to focus on Lyra one last time. "How?" he whispered through damaged bioelectric patterns. "Evolution," she replied simply. "Sometimes survival requires being too crazy to kill." The neural reconstruction bay was a marvel of galactic medical technology, capable of rebuilding damaged consciousness at the synaptic level. Vex'thara lay in the center of the chamber, his bioelectric form supported by containment fields, while nanoscale medical systems worked to repair the damage to his neural matrix. "The reconstruction will take several weeks," Physician Yilda explained to Lyra, who had stopped by to check on her former opponent. "His species' bioelectric architecture is incredibly delicate. Each pathway has to be perfectly calibrated, or his entire consciousness could collapse." "Will he be okay?" Lyra asked. "Physically, yes. Psychologically," the physician's tentacles performed what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "He's experienced something that his species' evolution never prepared them for. He's seen proof that their fundamental assumptions about intelligence and civilization are incomplete." Vex'thara's consciousness flickered online as he became aware of their conversation. His voice, when it came, was a barely stable harmonic. "I don't understand," he said. "My species represents the pinnacle of mental evolution. We've transcended physical limitations, achieved perfect neural efficiency, created a civilization based on pure thought." "Well, very impressive," Lyra agreed. "But you know what you gave up to achieve all that perfection?" "The ability to survive without it," Lyra replied. "Your species created beautiful minds for a beautiful world. Mine created whatever worked for a world that wanted us dead." "But surely advancement means leaving such primitive concerns behind." "Does it?" Lyra asked. "What happens if your bioelectric systems fail? What happens if you're stranded somewhere without technology to interface with? What happens when you encounter a problem that can't be solved with elegant logic?" Vex'thara's patterns flickered as he processed the implications. "My species spent millions of years learning that the universe doesn't care about your plans," Lyra continued. "We learned to adapt, to improvise, to embrace chaos when order failed. We learned that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is worthless if you can't implement it when everything goes wrong. But your mental patterns are so disorganized." "Organized chaos," Lyra corrected. "There's a difference. We're not random, we're adapted. We don't think in straight lines because straight lines get you killed when the universe starts throwing curveballs. Over the following weeks, as Vex'thara underwent reconstruction, word of the Dominant's trials spread throughout the galaxy. The story grew in the telling, as stories do, but the core facts remained consistent. A small human engineer had defeated one of the galaxy's premier mental athletes, then caused his neural architecture to overload by letting him interface with human consciousness. The response was fascinating. Species that had previously dismissed humans as primitive began requesting formal diplomatic contact. Research institutes offered substantial grants for studies of human psychology, and throughout civilized space, beings who had never questioned their assumptions about intelligence began to wonder what other surprises the universe might be hiding. Lyra, meanwhile, had returned to her work in the fusion engineering sector. The universe's capacity for mechanical failure remained constant, regardless of galactic politics, and someone had to keep the lights on. She was recalibrating a particularly stubborn power coupling when Admiral Korthek arrived, his reptilian form radiating what might have been amusement. "I've received some interesting communications from the Galactic Sciences Consortium," the Admiral said without preamble. "Oh?" Lyra replied, not looking up from her work. "It seems your species' psychological profile is under review. Apparently the consortium has been receiving reports about human capabilities that don't match their current classifications." Imagine that. "According to my sources, there's considerable debate about whether humans should be reclassified as a benign cognitive hazard or if an entirely new category should be created." "What would the new category be?" "Functionally insane, but apparently harmless," Admiral Korthek replied, "though some are arguing for weaponized chaos entities." Lyra's laugh was genuinely amused. "I like that second one." "There's also been an interesting development in the research community. Several institutes want to study human thought patterns to improve AI design." "How so?" "Apparently, the theory is that human consciousness represents a form of ordered chaos that could make artificial intelligence more adaptable and creative." "That could be interesting," Lyra admitted. "There's just one problem," the Admiral continued. "Early experiments suggest that exposing AI systems to human thought patterns for extended periods causes them to develop what researchers are calling aggressive creativity and hostile humor." Farajan hostile humor. AIs that have been exposed to human consciousness apparently begin making jokes. Dark ones. The researchers aren't sure if this represents evolution or degradation. Several weeks later, Vex'thara was finally cleared for release from the neural reconstruction facility. His bioelectric patterns had been completely rebuilt, stronger and more stable than before, but somehow dimmer. The experience had changed him in ways that went beyond mere physical healing. He found Lyra in the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars through the massive transparent aluminum viewport. She still looked small and fragile, but now he could see what he'd missed before. The way she moved with unconscious efficiency, the way her eyes tracked details others missed, the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the universe's worst efforts to kill her. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his bioelectric voice carrying new harmonics of humility. "For what?" "For not permanently damaging my consciousness," he replied. "I realize now that you could have. Easily." "Why would I want to hurt you?" Lyra asked, genuinely puzzled. "I challenged your species' dignity. I insulted your intelligence. I attempted neural domination." "So? People do stupid things when they're scared or confused. It's not worth causing permanent damage over." "My species would have considered it a matter of honor." "Honor's expensive," Lyra said. "Besides, you learned something important." "What's that?" "The universe is stranger and more dangerous than you thought. And that's actually good news." "How is that good news?" "Because now you know," Lyra replied. "And knowing means you can adapt. Your species spent so long being perfect that you forgot perfection is brittle. Now you remember." Vex'thara considered this. "I've been researching your species since my reconstruction. The more I learn, the more unsettling it becomes." "Unsettling how?" "Your homeworld's classification wasn't an error. Earth really is a Class Z Deathworld, but what's unsettling is that your species doesn't seem to realize how impossible your existence is." Oh, we know, Lyra said, we just don't let it slow us down. That's what I mean. Your species' casual attitude toward impossibility is disturbing. I found records of humans attempting things that should have been fatal as recreational activities. Like what? Climbing mountains in atmospheric conditions that would kill most species, diving to oceanic depths without technological support, jumping from aircraft for entertainment, exposing yourselves to gravitational extremes for fun. Those are hobbies, Lyra said, confused. Exactly, Vex'thara replied. You do impossible things for entertainment. That's not normal behavior for intelligent species. What do other species do for fun? World 1. Say things, intellectual pursuits, cultural activities, art, music, philosophy. We do those too, Lyra pointed out. But we also like a little excitement. A little excitement? Vex'thara's voice climbed several octaves. I found records of something called extreme sports that appear designed specifically to risk death for no survival benefit. Well, yeah, where's the fun if you're not risking something? The fun is in not dying. But if you're not risking anything, you're not really living, Lyra replied. You're just existing. Vex'thara fell silent, his bioelectric patterns dimming as he processed this fundamental difference in worldview. After a long moment he spoke again. I think I understand now why your species is so effective. It's not that you're more intelligent than us. It's that you're psychologically adapted for situations where intelligence isn't enough. Intelligence is a tool, Lyra agreed, but tools are only useful if you can use them when everything's going wrong. And that's why you're so dangerous. Are we dangerous? Lyra asked thoughtfully, or are we just thorough? I think, Vex'thara said slowly, that might be the most terrifying thing you've said yet. The galaxy, as it turned out, had been operating under a fundamental misapprehension for quite some time. The biological hierarchy system, with its elegant categories and logical assumptions, had made the classic mistake of confusing sophistication with effectiveness. The discovery that humans represented a working contradiction to most established theories of evolution and intelligence was causing ripples throughout galactic civilization. Academic papers were being rewritten, classification systems were being overhauled, and somewhere in the depths of the Galactic Sciences Consortium, a small group of researchers was trying to figure out how to categorize a species that appeared to evolve beyond logic itself. Lyra Chen, meanwhile, had returned to her fusion conduits, blissfully unaware that her casual demonstration of human psychological resilience had triggered a galaxy-wide reassessment of the relationship between intelligence, evolution, and survival. The universe's sense of humor, it seemed, was operating on a scale that even cosmic entities would find impressive, and somewhere in the neural reconstruction bay, a freshly rebuilt synaptic was learning to appreciate jokes, even if the punchline had required him to grow an entirely new consciousness. As for the betting pools, they had evolved into something approaching a galactic obsession. The current favorite scenario involved humans and a species of hive-minded quantum entities who were convinced that individual consciousness was an evolutionary dead end. The odds were heavily in favor of the humans. After all, the galaxy was finally learning the most important lesson about Earth's children: never bet against a species that considers impossibility a minor inconvenience. The universe, it seemed, had a great deal more to learn about the residents of that unremarkable little planet in the Orion Arm, and if early indications were accurate, it was going to be a very educational experience for everyone involved.